So Yaron Derman is the manager of eHealth standards at eHealth Ontario. He's the co-chair of the Pan-Canadian FHIR Implementers Working Group. Over the past 15 years, he's been leading health informatics analytics, data quality, and process improvement initiatives within Ontario hospitals and provincial organizations. His area of expertise is process improvement, lean it, adoption, change management, and mathematical modeling. And I give you Yaron Derman.
Great, thank you.
There's clicker here, you can see our slide there.
Good morning, everybody. Sound check, everybody sounds good. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here and to present on the topic of FHIR implementations underway in Ontario and Canada. You'll note the disproportionate emphasis on Ontario. Obviously, that's because of the fact that I come from eHealth Ontario, and so I have a closer scope of what's happening within our province. But this will be a collaborative presentation, because at the end, after I've gone through the information that I have about different FHIR implementations that are going on across Canada, I'm going to ask people to go to the microphone and either correct me and give me an update on the projects that I talked about, or to list the things that I've missed, so we can share with everybody and understand what's happening truly in terms of different projects. So as Attila said, I manage the team of eHealth standards at eHealth Ontario, and we support interfaces that are both in HL7v2, HL7v3, as well as that use XDS-CDA, and currently FHIR. And we also support the use of terminology using SNOMED and LOINC and other such terminologies. Today I'm going to be talking to you wearing my co-chair of the Pan-Canadian FHIR Implementation Working Group hat rather than eHealth Ontario or Representative Ontario. Okay, so again, just to briefly cover where we're going to go, we're going to talk a little bit about context, and I'm glad to see in the previous discussions there was a lot of that context already set. Then talk about what I know about implementations in Ontario, and then to move on to Pan-Canadian implementations that I've heard about, and then to open up the mic for questions, as well as to have folks stand up there and say, you know, this is either my product or my initiative. Here's the type of data we're trying to exchange. Here's the business problem we're trying to solve, as well as what the status of that implementation is. So I ask everybody who has a FHIR project that it was nice to see before people putting their hand up, that you prepare your remarks on those three topics. So I borrowed this slide from Attila to talk about the state of FHIR evolving. And truth to be told, FHIR is taking this similar amount of time as other technical standards to be developed. But I like this tree analogy that's used on the slide, because you see FHIR started off as a little sapling or a drop at 2011, and now we're at 2018 and we're starting to really see things flourish. But similar to a tree, you do get some fruit even earlier on than when the tree is fully mature. And similarly with FHIR, we see a lot of implementations that are already taking place even as FHIR continues to evolve. And I think that speaks a lot to the vision around how FHIR is supposed to work in terms of being modular and allowing people to build things according to their needs over time. So taking the tree analogy, and we've heard about this in a couple of the other presentations, obviously when you're dealing with a greenfield situation, which means that either you're a product or a service that either there's no other interfaces available in the market, or you're just starting out as a product, or it's a new idea that people are trying out, then for sure it makes sense to reach for something that's the latest and greatest, uses internet standards, and so FHIR works really well and is flourishing a lot in that market. At the same time, using the same analogy, if you think of a tree growing amongst a bunch of skyscrapers, the amount of sunlight it's going to see is going to be a little bit different. And that's similar to a brownfield situation. When you have hospitals and you have healthcare systems that have, or services that have been built out with a different type of interface or have already done their integration, it's much more difficult to see the cost or priority of moving forward with a FHIR equivalent of that service. If there's a brand new service that you're trying to offer off of that product, then yes, that might be more like a greenfield. So I think that sort of sets the context, and again, we've heard that from our European colleagues, as to why we'll see a certain rate of adoption of FHIR and what the types of projects are. So my source of information, to a certain degree, as I mentioned, I co-chair the Pan-Canadian FHIR Implementation Working Group with Gavin. And it's been a very rewarding experience. We're getting closer and closer to 2 years. We have 160 people signed up. And as you can see from the diagram, so at the center of it all is a FHIR working group or community call that we keep each other informed about what's going on. But really the intent of this implementation working group, and we call it implementation, is not so much to just change information, but to work together towards solving specific problems. And so that's why you'll see the types of domains that we have set up in terms of work streams. We have tooling to make sure that people know what the type of tooling other people are using, and so we can try to get the same type of products and outcomes. Solution architecture, because FHIR does use a different architectural paradigm, so we need people who are breaking ground in that area to share that information with others, and for those others to raise issues, and so that things will be implemented in a go-forward fashion. Smart on FHIR is a big topic that I think we're going to hear a lot about over the course of the day, as well as clinical decision support hooks, and that's an emerging work stream that I encourage people to participate in. And one of the work streams that's a little bit silent right now, but is actually quite critical, is around client and provider registries. And you can imagine as we move more and more into an interconnected environment between products that may not know each other from before, the need to be able to identify and validate a certain person's identity is going to become more and more critical. And so that work has moved forward, but is on a hiatus for now. And e-referrals, there's a session this afternoon by Tim Beresny, who's from the Chief Technology Officer of CareDove, and he's really led the charge in developing a FHIR specification for Canada, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So all that to say, this is where I'm getting a lot of my information, and I do encourage folks to participate, and there'll be another call to action at the end. Okay, so focus on Ontario. So again, this is wearing just the Ontario hat, not an eHealth Ontario hat or a government hat. If we look at what's available on FHIR today, so if we start on the right-hand side, you'll see that today the Digital Health Immunization Repository, also known as DHIR, which is offered up through the ministry, is using FHIR to both send information out as well as moving towards having information being sent in via FHIR. Medications, similarly, is being offered up to viewers using only FHIR. Ontario Telehealth Network and Ontario MD partnered together with eHealth Ontario to build a full e-consult lifecycle. So what that means is that as a primary care provider, I'm looking for a specialist to provide me with some information so I can better treat this patient and potentially help me with the decision whether I want to refer to a specialist. And so using my local point-of-service system or my electronic medical record, my EMR, I'm able to create an e-consult by searching for which specialty I want, and then be able to actually fire off the request and get a response back in my EMR without ever leaving the EMR. And similarly, on the other end, the specialists can do the same thing in their platform. An interesting one is the next one, Ontario MD's Health Reports Manager. So Ontario MD has been working together with eHealth Ontario to get data out of hospitals and into physicians' electronic medical records. But now we're expanding the scope of the type of records that primary care providers would like, and in order to do that, they were reaching out to a whole domain of independent health facilities, and they polled them and they said, you know, we'd really like to do the latest and greatest, so we'd like to use FHIR. So even though this is, it's a similar type of pool of information as what's being done from the hospital information systems, but they really started from the ground up and said, what do we really need? So they didn't take the like-for-like approach, and I think that's going to be an important lesson for folks going forward. If you already have an implementation of something not using FHIR, don't assume you don't need business requirements. You can't just assume it'll be like for like. The two different architectural paradigms and the data structures are different enough that you really should give yourself the time to think through what your business requirements will be on that new service that's running with FHIR. Finally, the new kid on the block is lab results, but there's a twist to the lab results because here we're talking about consumer queries. So this is where I, as a consumer or patient, want to see my own lab results. So for those that have Life Labs or whatever, you already have that, but in this case, we're actually pulling off of a massive information store called Ontario Laboratory Information System, or OLIS. So you can get your whole history for a decade of information using this query off of mobile apps that are being developed for consumers, and we'll talk about that in a second. Design and development, so we're moving forward. Born is registry information for babies that are being born and for children going up to a certain age. And they already do have a pool of information using XDS and CDA. Now they're looking to move ahead, so they're actually using FHIR to pull that information out of electronic medical records and to exchange that with some of the other repositories on the right. Client registry, provider registry, you talked about that, especially if you think about it for those folks that are coming from a vendor community and you want to be able to validate the patient information. If you're working off of the internet, then having a internet-enabled type of profile that is what your design and development team is used to, which is using JSON XML rather than using something like V3 or V2, is going to be really important. So we're moving forward with that as well. Finally, consent. So that was mentioned before, but in this case, consent means at this point we're starting with, if I as a provider need to see information that I'm blocked from doing so, how do I send in something that says I'm going to break the glass, so to speak. I'm going to send information that says I'm going to I need to see this information even though I'm not allowed to, so you can audit me and keep track of why I'm doing this. So that we're moving forward with using FHIR across its various assets that speak different dialects and using FHIR as the way to share that information. In the planning stages, which means there's no current project that's actually funded or approved to move forward with this, we have OneID, which is our base product for authorization and authentication in the healthcare ecosystem. Currently runs on SAML, but we think that OAuth 2 makes sense going forward if we're going to be supporting FHIR. Primary care repository is a way of getting information out of electronic medical records of primary care physicians in a place where anybody else can access it. So we're doing a proof of concept with Mohawk College to see how that would work using FHIR and using a database that recognizes FHIR at source. Provider registry, we want to move ahead and not just have the ability to query it, but actually to send information, because providers change their information, their phone numbers, their offices, their hours, and they can send that into our provider registry so our information can stay up to date. And finally, e-referral, and like I said, that's going to be a continuing theme throughout the day. E-referral to me is very important, because how many people here have the ability to, they use their system either to send a referral, not a fax referral, an email referral, or receive an email or some type of referral today? Does your system provide any of that type of functionality? Okay, great. We have one participant in the audience. But e-referrals is really about opening up all sorts of services that today people typically think of as more in a closed environment. I have my Rolodex on my desk, I know who I usually refer to, and that's who I'm going to go to. And if I don't have it on my Rolodex, I don't know about them. So having something that makes things more discoverable and more plug and play is going to be really important to make choice and access much more available to patients as we go forward. Taking a different lens on the same type of information, I thought it'd be interesting to just see if I was a point-of-service system or an EMR vendor today, what type of interfaces I would have access to today. And again, so this is looking outside of hospitals and outside of viewers. So you'll see of the ones I listed before, and I was neglect to mention InfoWays Medication ePrescribe, so it's a good thing it's over here. Today, EMRs in Ontario are starting to roll out the ability for the primary care provider to send a prescription to a pharmacy of the patient's choice using FHIR-based APIs from their EMR, so they just stay in their EMR. Similarly, eConsult, we talked about that, and e-referral, e-booking, the CareDove product that's showcased outside and it's going to be on later on, they've already built Smart on FHIR, and the ability to not just choose a referral to send to, but actually book the time and appointment that the patient or the consumer wants. So that's a nice feature. In terms of not FHIR, just again to provide context and positioning, today EMR vendors support OneID. They send in information to Born not using FHIR. They're using XDS CDA. There is a primary care provider, primary care repository proof of technology that's out in the field, work with a couple of family health teams, and that's based on IHE XDS CDA. Community care referrals to the HSSO, or which is formerly known as the Community Care Access Centers, or CCACs, is using, not using FHIR. and Ontario MD currently to get the data from Health Report Manager into the EMR. It's not using FHIR at this point, and lab results, again, to get to the EMR would be an HL7 version 2 query. If you want to learn more about the various assets that are in Ontario, not just eHealth Ontario, not just the ministry, there's a plug for something called the Digital Health Asset Inventory, where we're listing different initiatives and products and services that are going on in Ontario so you can find out who else is doing things. We encourage you to submit your information to, we'll have the email address at the end. So if the following slide that I'm going to show here, if you're not on that slide, then it doesn't mean that you're not in there. And if you're not in the asset inventory, then I do encourage you to go ahead and submit, but also to use it to find partners and to learn from other people. So just taking a sample of folks that have submitted to the asset inventory. Again, this is not an endorsement, but it's just taking a sample of the different types of products. And if we look at them, you'll see in some are patient engagement, some are provider. You'll see that can immunize, so that's allowing people to have a digital yellow card, which is their immunization record for themselves, and they're looking to use FHIR to talk to Ontario's Digital Health Immunization Repository to get that data out to help auto-populate someone's yellow card. Similarly, with the Medley and NED, the next two, they're looking to pull the lab data for a patient so they can see their own lab results from OLIS using FHIR. And that's why we have that consumer query going forward. And Patient Keeper is another example of another product. And again, I think a lot of these would be characterized as greenfield opportunities. I'm showcasing once again e-referrals. I do again encourage people who have an opportunity to do the code camp to go participate in that. It's a nice worked out example where you can actually interact with the product and send a referral, get a response of a referral, use Smart on FHIR. Hats off to Tim Beresny from CareDove for really leading the charge on that. But it is a collaborative of different vendors. We have in the work stream, we do have Novari, Strata, Ocean, or Cognizant MD, Think Research. We have Orion Health co-chairing it, as well as we have many ministry partners as well, and also jurisdictional partners. So we'd love to hear your voice there. If you could please make it out, that would just make this more robust and more pan-Canadian. So I did a call out for other projects, and one of the responses I got back was that the provider registry that's used in Alberta and some of the western provinces, as well as I believe Nova Scotia, which is formerly known as the WIC provider registry system, has moved forward with a prototype of a FHIR query for their provider registry. Again, going back to the point of when it's a brownfield, they already have usage of their provider registry using version 3 messaging. So to go ahead and use FHIR, they need new use cases and new funding. So they're moving forward with it slowly as they develop that business case to roll it out. As mentioned before, InfoWay is providing physicians and pharmacists with the capability to send and receive electronic prescriptions using the Prescribe It product, which they're rolling out across several provinces at this time, and that's a FHIR-enabled service as well. The Canadian Institute for Health Information provided us with a couple of projects that they're looking at. You can see the first one is actually InterROI, which is Resident Assessment Instrument, is a well-known, well-used type of instrument for measuring patient status at different points in their healthcare journey and to help pick things that should be done to help improve their status. So that one, they're moving ahead, although they already have an interface, they are moving ahead with a FHIR version of it as well. The next two are, I think, greenfield, I believe, where they're looking at patient reported outcomes, as well as looking at patient incidents in radiation oncology. And in those two cases, you see that they're in various stages of getting towards production. So with that, I'm going to ask if there are any. First, we'll take folks that want to come up to the microphone, and if you could please share what the name of the service or product that you're speaking to, the type of data exchange, and the type of business problem that you're solving using FHIR. It would be great if you could share that with everybody. Anybody not bashful? Okay, oh, here we have one.
Hi. So my name is Cameron Bowe. I'm from the Can Immunize team that's working on connecting the Can Immunize app to the DHIR FHIR interfaces. We're also building some FHIR interfaces to a data set called the Canadian Vaccine Catalog, which will support in addition to our use case with vaccine terminology in our app, use cases for electronic medical records and immunization repository systems. So making sure that their terminology is always up to date, but also pairing that terminology with product data that comes from vaccine manufacturers.
Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Adam Kozlowski from Ministry of Health, and I just wanted to let you know that we're working with Smile CDR team, which is the vendor who produces a FHIR-compliant EHR system, to create, we've created a prototype called Patients Portal, and we have shared this with our management. We got great support. We'll have a demo at 4:30 in the other location. And we just wanted to let people know that we are embracing Smart on FHIR approach for applications and trying to make Smart on FHIR Gallery, which exists in the United States, become a viable proposition for Canadian space as well. So we have a project in the way that will create generalized apps that will be able to hopefully be open sourced, and in the future will allow every organization to just pick and use whichever viewers or apps they like in Canada.
Great, thank you. That's great. Any questions? Ideally at the microphone, but if you're more comfortable in your seat.
Not a question, but just another comment. If you were here for the earlier session for the FHIR for Execs, brought up the simplifier.net and where some of the registries are for some of these profiles and implementation guides, and a lot of the FHIR-enabled products that were described here, even the CVC, is on, there's at least an early reference that I've seen on simplifier.net. So the amazing thing is, if you're curious about any of these things, you can go in right now, like from your mobile phone, and start playing with them. It's all open and it's there for you. And I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, good comment. Last chance. Oh, great.
Just a comment. I'm Hutan from Google Cloud. And we are focusing on FHIR right now, and we are providing a FHIR store that you can connect to using APIs. And it's an early access program. It's not like launched yet, but we are looking for partners to develop this further.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. If you're not already in asset inventory, I encourage you to send that information, and I'm glad to see more people are stepping up.
Hi there, Ann Belford from TELUS Health, and I just wanted to let folks know that we have another FHIR implementation for secure messaging, physician to physician, and that's in production right now, has been for a few months. And secondly, we're working on another FHIR implementation for e-claims. Currently, we support this.
V3.
It is a V3, and we're developing a FHIR interface for that as well.
Great, thank you. And if it's not in the asset inventory, then please do send it in.
Okay.
Hi, I'm from Humber River Hospital. I'm working on a project for a medication reconciliation. So at the time of admission, calling DHDR data into Meditech application and doing the medication reconciliation. That's one of the things. The other thing is with Meditech web version, we are planning to have labs called into web interface for specifically for our nephrology folks who actually take care of all dialysis patients. So these are the two things that I'm aware of.
Great, thank you. Fantastic.
If there's no further questions, then just a quick time check. I think we're at break.
So I'm going to just,
We've got about 9 minutes, but we've got the ability to break for lunch. Lunch will be downstairs, and there'll be people out front helping direct us to where we need to go. Big thanks, Yaron.